Part 2, Early Summer. Chapter 1, Jim Garfield and David Hunter Duncan Ride. Jim Garfield gunned his 1200 Beamer and the bike barely made a noise. He raced a few hundred feet to the next stoplight and geared down again. On freeways, bikers could ride on the shoulder or weave their way through stationary cars. But in the stop and start traffic of strip mall roads with soccer moms talking on their phones and making unpredictable turns, a biker had to be careful. Jim sat in the hellfire Houston sun amidst stopping and starting passenger cars and dreamed of days when riding was fun. Jim Garfield wore a full helmet equipped with cell applications. He would be able to talk with David Hunter Duncan, and they would be able to coordinate their rendezvous. The helmet offered protection, but more importantly, it offered anonymity. The latter was valued highly by both Jim Garfield and David Hunter Duncan. When they wanted to talk freely, they would climb on their Beamers, place their helmets on their heads, and then ride to a secluded spot. It could be a creek bed, a park, or a golf course. They played a game amongst themselves to scout meeting places, and they were both good at it. Their choice of bike was also offered some anonymity. Beamers did not turn heads the way other bikes, especially Harleys, turned heads. The two men could pass as Harley riders, and they had ridden a few in their day, and they still wore T-shirts and felt a kinship to Harley people. But Harleys were eyed by cops and our other Harley riders, as well as by nerdy citizens who followed biker rivalries the way other people followed football teams. Beamers were low profile. As Jim Garfield sat at yet another traffic light, David Hunter Duncan smoothly pulled next to him on his right. David Hunter Duncan flicked a small wave and then pressed a button on his helmet. "Follow me. We'll turn at the next light." Jim Garfield responded with a thumbs up. David Hunter Duncan took full advantage of the idling cars to serpentine a path to the left lane. Not satisfied waiting in line, he shimmied between the immobile traffic and the median guardrail. "We're supposed to be low profile," Jim Garfield screamed as he followed the leader. Both Beamers passed the turning minivan and rumbled off ahead of the traffic. Jim Garfield was once more angry at his impulsive friend. Nothing like riding like a teenager to draw attention to yourself. The duo found themselves on a winding sylvan side road that featured a driving range, cemetery, a pet cemetery, and offered access to dozens of industrial parks. At the first stop sign, David Hunter Duncan gave a hand signal to turn right. They turned, and a few hundred feet down the road, they coasted into Garrison Park. Garrison Park did not get much use. Kids and old-timers used to fish in the pond, but the county ceased stocking it a few years back. The park was not easily accessible by foot. It didn't have many trees, so no one picnicked there in the summer. On nice days, mailmen and servicemen and delivery people could be seen eating their lunches at scattered picnic tables. But today the thermometer read 98 Fahrenheit, and the two riders had the place to themselves. Near a tennis court where weeds sprouted through the cracked asphalt, David Hunter Duncan parked his Beamer. Jim Garfield pulled in parallel a few feet away, and the two men tore off their helmets and dug into their saddlebags for cold drinks. Jim Garfield pulled out a flavored water, and David Hunter Duncan grabbed a real sugar cola. The two men slouched in their saddles and faced each other. David Hunter Duncan opened the meeting. "Look, we're going to make crank. You're either with us or you're not. With the terrorists taking out most of the narcs in Harris County, knock the hell out of the narcs in Waller County, we got to move now. We got to make haste while the sun is shining." Jim Garfield nodded. "I thought you were going to tell me about Memphis." "Memphis? What about Memphis?" "I know what you know. Somehow, some way, most of the people who work in the federal building and most of the people who work at the federal courthouse have gotten sick. That's what I know about Memphis. Jim Garfield knew that much from watching the news channels. He also knew that the buildings were contaminated and that it would take months and millions to decontaminate them. But the news people knew exactly how the buildings got contaminated. They were not reporting that information. How was Delbert Wayne? Alongside. Good news, bad news, and worse news. The good news that almost every single federal attorney, as well as almost every single DEA agent and FBI agent, is sick with some kind of illness. What's the bad news? We assume that the DEA was involved in Delbert Wayne's case. They're the feds, right? Turns out it's the ATF. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. When did they become narcs? Shortly after Waco. Their existence was in jeopardy because they were targeting white rural Christians. They got busy and started infiltrating bike gangs and street gangs. They do more street work than the DEA. I didn't know that. But at any rate, their Memphis office is 6 blocks away from the federal building. They seem to be okay. Jim Garfield nodded. But if they're not terrorists. If the criminals took out the federal attorneys, wouldn't the feds want to bargain? I talked to Delbert Wayne's lawyer about that. Well, actually, I talked to some girl who works in his office. That lawyer don't talk to nobody but God. She said no. The feds planned to move the case to Jackson, Mississippi, and let that office handle it. Of course, I had to ask her what they would do if something happened to the ATF office. Jim Garfield's head snapped back. How did you phrase the question? Well, I tried to, ask it indirectly, asking without asking, hoping she might say something like, if only they would have hit the ATF. But she never said anything like that. So how did you ask her? I just said, if something like that happened to the ATF office, how would that affect the case? There was a long pause, and Jim Garfield spoke up. And what did she say? She didn't say nothing at first. Then she said, I don't know. Jim Garfield moaned. David Hunter Duncan continued. I told you there was bad news and worse news. Jim Garfield gestured his hand in a circular motion. Continue, he requested nonverbally. Delbert Wayne's lawyer has come up sick. Delbert Wayne's lawyer has come up sick. He had to try a case at the federal courthouse. He must have called whatever the feds caught. He's in the hospital with a pretty serious infection. Hunter, Jim Garfield started, trying not to sound angry. That woman's loyalty is to her boss. If she thinks you might have gotten him sick, she would report you in a heartbeat. Confidentiality be damned. No, I'm a stupid cracker, and she knows it. I could never mastermind an attack like that. You know it, she knows it, everyone knows it. Jim Garfield nodded, seeming to buy David Hunter Duncan's argument. If Delbert Wayne's lawyer doesn't recover, then we're out a shitload of money, which is why we need to get the crank moving. It's a big change, Hunter, which is why we're doing this. Jim Garfield had prepared to refute David Hunter Duncan's arguments. Crank would draw attention. Crank dealers were often users themselves, and they could be highly unpredictable. Organizations need to grow at an orderly rate. David Hunter Duncan cut him off. Look, this is how it is. I'm in, Ray's in, Joe's in. We are going to do this with or without you. Are you in? Jim Garfield paused and stared deep into David Hunter Duncan's eye. Finally, he sighed and shrugged and said, I'm in.